since it opened up at 1. So Chaha is a small little group that we get together in Charlotte. So if you live in the Charlotte area, we meet a Saturday a month to get together and hack, and then we go drink beer afterwards. So if anyone's interested, that's Chaha. So I figured that's a little pitch for our group. So standard disclaimers. The information here are my views, and just like the title of this talk, citations are needed. But I do have a slide deck with some of the books that I use for reference and for researching this talk. And I have to tell you, this is one of the most difficult ones I've done. It's just a little history behind this. I was working with a social engineer professional. I had a very frustrating day working with him and came home, slammed down a bunch of bourbons, and then wasn't. Bourbon makes everything better. Yeah, don't make me disclose exactly who it was. But anyway, there was a CFP open for Carolina Con. And they're like, it's not going to happen. Carolina Con's not going to happen if we don't get enough speakers. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to have this talk, and I'm going to throw it out there. And I get an acceptance letter back a couple months later. I had to email them back. What exactly did I submit for this talk? Can you please refresh my memory? So
that's why the sent email box is so nice.
Exactly. Well, in Gmail, it doesn't work. Like, for me, it doesn't anyway, because I don't know how to use Gmail.
You're doing it wrong.
I'm doing it wrong. All right. All right, so I thought, like, who to introduce me better than my 14-year-old self. So
where are we at? What are we doing?
What are we doing? We're recording.
Okay, my name is Gatekeeper. It's my alias name. I'm an anarchist.
All right, 14 years old, already committed to anarchy.
Vatican back then too?
No. I wasn't conceived in one either, so that Vanagon came later in life. But so my nickname kind of has a PH in it instead of F for Surfer Dave. That's a throwback to some of the stuff that I was doing back then, phone freaking, because my cousins lived in Philadelphia and I was in Virginia. It cost way too much money to call. Found something on a BBS that said, if you make this noise in this phone, it will give you long distance. I'm like, sweet. So that was my first introduction kind of into the world of hacking and things like that. So let's jump into this topic, why I think social engineering is bullshit, and let's call it what it is.
You know what's bullshit?
The failure of social engineering. Right-wing social engineering.
Social engineer.
Games.
So what's social engineering?
Left-wing social engineering.
Social engineer.
Love games.
Social engineering.
Socially engineered.
This is bullshit.
Nice.
All right, so So the theme for Carolina Con, a lot of us submitted as, well, I didn't submit, but I found out later, David submitted as Old Greg. There's like 15 people submitted as Old Greg, so that was the running joke there, and just thought it was great to leave it in there. So congrats if you actually recognize that. And we trolled Kelly for a long time with that meme there. So I really wanted to kind of look at the definitions of what a social engineer. So the way that this talk is structured, we're going to kind of look at the definition of it. We're going to actually understand what it is, what we're really doing to people. We're looking at a history of what has happened throughout our lives, why we're so susceptible to these things. Look at some techniques that kind of work from a sociology perspective, and then look at some neuro-linguistic programming. So let's just jump right in. So social engineer, so the definition of social is relating to or involving activities where people like to hang out and do things together, just like us, or if you're in the Lockpick Village, it's something fun to do. You get together and you enjoy spending time with each other, you're happy to be with each other. And sometimes this doesn't work for all of us because relating to people or society in general, a lot of us have some social phobias and things like that. So maybe that doesn't apply to all of us. The definition of an engineer. Now this is one of my biggest pet peeves because my title is actually an information security engineer, but I never went to school to have a degree or a license as an engineer. We're all called engineers in some form or fashion. I mean, who's got an MCSE? Here, are you an engineer? You know, anyone can have that. So,
Consult someone else? What?
right. So the definition of an engineer is a person, a scientific training who does all these complicated things. It's a person who specializes in it. Now, this slide was probably the most difficult one on my deck to find because you Google woman, female engineer, and the internet thinks you're joking. And it's like, you mean you want a scantily clad engineer or you want an engineer's costume? But no, I mean, men and women both are equally capable of being engineers. So this lady's working on what looks like to be a power plant or oil refinery. Another definition is someone who's in charge of an airplane or ship, like these guys. Or a guy who runs a train, like that guy. So engineering now, when we actually look at the actual practice of what an engineer applies, it describes it. I won't read the whole thing, but it's a special body of knowledge. Professional practice involves extensive training in that application of knowledge. So when we use the word social engineer, how many times are we using this incorrectly, like in our field? What are we doing? What are we really doing? So the whole thing was like, this is not really social engineering. We're manipulating people. In the tech industry, this is how we do it in tech. We use phishing. We use phone calls. We use dumpster diving. We dox people. We use OSINT. Like this is a screenshot of Maltego, and it's a great tool, pulls from multiple different resources on the web, open source intelligence, and find out a lot about people, but it's all really manipulation. It's not necessarily anything that has to do with social or engineering. So let's look at some of the history of manipulation and deception. And really, how did it come about that we're so susceptible as a society, as humans? It doesn't matter. It's a universal thing around the earth as humans that we can be manipulated and deceived. So some of the stories, the story of Adam and Eve, just to recap, they were put in the garden and told to serve God and that they could eat of any tree except for this one tree. Satan, who was an angel in the vicinity of the earth, saw that worship. He wanted it for himself. He transformed himself into a snake, went down and told Eve that if she ate of this tree, she'd be like God, knowing good and bad. She was deceived, ate this. Now, the interesting thing about that, she was deceived. She's kind of new to the earth. She's kind of young compared to Adam. Well, she actually took the apple and brought it back to him and said, hey, guess what I found out? And he's, supposed to be a lot wiser because he's been there a lot longer. He was easily deceived by this as well. So the history of deception is a very powerful thing, especially when he's been like millennia by himself and he's got a chick and he's like, I'll lose this chick if I don't accept this, so I just guess I'll go ahead and do that. He's like, I'm not going back by myself. At least in my mind, that's what I think of. So another practice that is it even happens today, is that of using false weights. So you would go and you think you're buying a unit of grain. You might get half a unit or 3/4 of a unit of grain, to the point where it had to be legislated. Like in the Roman times, they had tax collectors who were actually in charge of going and checking the weights to make sure the weights were valid. And next time you're at a gas pump, look, there's a sticker on there that says, this year it's been certified that this thing is accurate, that we're not deceiving people. So we actually have to have checks and balances against that. Clothing, makeup, and smells. For millennia, there's been archaeological evidence that have found like 70,000 years ago that our ancestors adorned themselves with a reddish powder called ochre. And in doing so, this stimulated the men into thinking that the women would be ovulating. So they would appear more attractive at that time and be more attractive to the men. So building on that, you had several different other types of eyeshadow, green paste that would define their features. The Egyptians were well known for that. They put wigs on their heads. The Mesopotamians would exaggerate their lips and the color of their face, and Greek and Romans would actually dye their hair blonde, use pumice stone to remove unwanted body hair, makeup to cover blemishes, and they'd lighten their skin. I mean, does that sound anything different than kind of what we're used to today? I get a really dry throat, so I apologize if I'm drinking quite a bit. It's saving up for tonight. So we're told think about how you were raised as a person. You're told you're not supposed to pick your nose in public. You're not supposed to be like this guy. You're supposed to be polite, even if, you're not supposed to tell people exactly what you think. Someone's got stinky breath. You don't tell them. You go up to your grandfather, you sit on his knee, he smells like he's probably wet himself. You don't say anything because that's mean. It's a polite thing. If you think about it as a society in general, we all do that because we accept that as being polite. It's a type of deception, really, because we're not telling how we feel outside. We keep those things inside. We're taught to, if you don't have something nice, don't say it at all. So it's easy to understand that certain things that we don't say can be portrayed to other people in other means, through body language and other forms of speech. One thing that we teach our children is tell them the stories about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. Now, this is a picture of Odin, and the history of Santa Claus comes from the Germanic people and the Norse god Odin. And so some of the things that have kind of led into this, Odin leads a hunting party and celebration at Yule time, and this kind of gives comparisons of Santa and his 8 flying reindeer. You have a Celtic Holly King, Thor. These guys would ride across the sky in chariots and give gifts to children at the end of the year. So those types of things have kind of fed into that Santa legend. Oestria or Ostara is a Germanic divinity, and she's known as Easter. So a lot of the celebrations around Easter, she was also a goddess of fertility. So that's why some of the symbolism around Easter, we have Easter bunnies, we have chicks, we have all these chicks and rabbits and things like that because of the ability to procreate rapidly. They're celebrating the goddess of fertility. So we kind of wrapped some of those things around there and just accepted them for what they are as being, Christian. And we teach these things. But, I'm not here to judge anything. I'm just here to look at some of the history of, why some of these things work with our generations, how it's been passed down through the generations. So let's talk about some of the techniques that work. So we're going to look at some of the sociology-based works of Cialdini. Robert Cialdini was an amazing sociologist, and I really enjoy his work. So I picked a couple that I really thought kind of applied to manipulation. So we talked about the golden rule, and that's the rule kind of known as reciprocation or reciprocity, that you give somebody and what you give, you expect to receive in return. So everything kind of evens out. Well, that can be abused. The Hare Krishna. If you're not familiar with the Hare Krishna, they are not as evident as they used to be. Especially, I haven't seen they're in uptown Charlotte quite a bit, but I haven't seen them in public places as much. But they figured out how to use this rule of reciprocation to their advantage. They approach a stranger with a flower and just walk up and say, "This is a gift from the Hare Krishna." And of course, you're taken aback because it's a stranger giving you something. You're like, "What's going on here?" And so they just politely mention, "If you'd like to make a small donation to our cause, we'd appreciate it." Or you try to give it back. Like, "No, it's yours, free of charge." So they figured out that abusing that rule of reciprocity could actually be in their favor. Street performers asking for donations. I thought this was interesting. I went to a conference and I was in New Orleans and in Jackson Square watching these break dancers. And I noticed how this rule of reciprocity worked. And this is actually, a legitimate way of manipulating people. And in this case, I was happy to pay because I enjoyed their show. So you had the guys all lined up in the crew, but the guys on the left, the first guy would grab the bucket, and then the next guy over would take a handful of cash and throw it in the bucket, and he'd go around. So now it looked like that first guy threw in like $5. He goes around, and now he's got more money. Because people feel obligated, they're standing there, now the guy's running around quickly before everyone can disperse. You feel obligated to give because you enjoyed what you saw. I used to live in New York, and there is a olive bar up on the Upper West Side that when people would like to come and visit, I'd take them there because it's one of those weird things in New York. And after reading through and kind of thinking through things, I kind of realized what they were doing there. So these guys were flying in or driving in, and we were like I was living in Brooklyn, so we'd park the cars in Brooklyn, take the trains all the way into the city up in the Upper West Side. And if anyone's ever done that, it's like an hour and a half, 2 hours on the train. But we'd get these people, and we'd go to the store, and there were free samples. And it wasn't just like Costco free samples where the lady's there, and she gives out a tray full, and then you just walk away because you're not interested in talking to her anyway. You could eat as much as you want in this store. And I always thought that was interesting because now I think back on it, 4 out of 5 people that I take up there would end up buying all kinds of olives. Like not just one little package of them. I mean, we'd have like pounds of olives. And we'd be carrying these olives around. We'd be on the train for 2 hours going back. We'd be still walking around the city. They would do this. They wouldn't even think of it. They thought, well, I got all the free olives I wanted. I really probably should pay for some and take some with me. So that was a really good, interesting technique, and one of the few places in New York you can get something for free. Another method that works is commitment and consistency. So racetrack bettors are often more likely to stand with their horse after they've made a bet. So they get in there, they look at the track record, they're indecisive. As soon as they pick that horse and put that money down, as soon as that horse is doing anything, if it's getting ahead, they're cheering. If it's falling behind, they're trying to coach it. If you've been to a racetrack, or if you've seen shows where people are coaching and yelling at the horse to go faster, or really they stand by that. They committed to buying that, putting money on that horse, and now they stay consistent to that by continuing to cheer that horse on and hope it wins. And they continue to, if you look at track records, they'll continue to go back and bet on the same animal that they did the first time through the course of that betting day. I'm not trying to downplay this issue at all. This is actually this is something real. It's not just a single gender type problem. And I'll explain why. So this is actually from the Australian government, the silent issue. And it talks of meaning like the verbal abuses and things that happen that a lot of people don't know about. And I'll show you an example of this. I'll explain a situation that Cialdini wrote about in his book. He spoke about 2 people, a man and a woman, that were living together for a long time. The man was a drunk alcoholic. He just didn't want to get married. He's just happy with everything. She wanted him to change. She wanted to get married. She wanted him to stop drinking because he was, just a low-down guy. He just didn't appreciate her at all. One day she said, "I'm done. I'm finished. I'm leaving." So she did. She leaves, breaks off the relationship there, finds another guy who's exactly what she's looking for. Moves in with him. They get engaged. Well, the first guy comes back. He's like, "Hey, you know what I was thinking about? I was thinking about you and our time together. I really don't want to lose it. I went to rehab. I stopped drinking. I want you to come move back in with me, and I want you to marry me." So now the first guy that she really wanted to be with has come back into her life. So she splits off. She gets out of the marriage, or what is it? Engagement. Gets out of the engagement, moves back in with the first guy. What happens after time? Now, of course, now she's listening to her family say, "Why are you going back with that no good guy?" She's defending him now because that's the one that she really wants to be with. So she goes back, and what happens? He falls back into the same old patterns. Weeks go by, months go by, he's back drinking again. She asks when they're going to get married, and He doesn't want to set a date. But what happens now when her family comes back and says, why are you still with this guy? It's because I love him and he loves me, and eventually it's going to work out. She's committed back. She's reaffirmed in her mind that she really wanted to be with him. She broke off what she had. She defended him, and now she's staying consistent with that first guy. Now, another example to illustrate this is that of Christmas time. So I don't know if it's, you probably have heard of it before, but how the toy companies have figured out how to make money after Christmas. So what they do is they short sell the toys during Christmas. So say you offer, like say Kelly's going to give his son the Super Whiz Bang PP robot, and he's promised it to him, and his son's like, that's the only thing I want. That's it. I don't want anything else, Daddy. That's all I want for Christmas. Kelly's like, absolutely, that's what you're going to get. What happens? This is a thing that has been mass marketed, mass advertised. You go to the store, and what happened? Well, we don't have any more. Okay, so now what do? Well, I got to give my son something for Christmas. So you buy him something equivalent, or maybe even more, because you promised him that you're going to do that. So what happens? All of a sudden, New Year's Day rolls around, and all the stores are flooded with these toys again. Well, you go back and you buy the toy. If you ever think about it, the toy companies actually figured this out, that they can short supply that and play off this commitment and consistency. They know that their kids have been promised these toys. The parents want to show that a promise is a promise. They want to stay consistent. So they go and buy the toy. And now they spend twice as much as they would have before. So toy companies, they know how to manipulate us as well. Now we'll switch to some of the topics of neurolinguistic programming. And it was brought to my attention at Bsides Charlotte that one of the guys was, before the talk, he was adamant that NLP doesn't work. I guess he was thinking of a different context. We had one guy at Carolina Con a couple of years back talk about how he could just read people's minds and how NLP is the most amazing thing. I like to talk about it more as a way to evaluate the situation, a way to evaluate another person, tell if they're lying, or allow you to build a rapport that you're needed to build to close the gap and be able to either manipulate that person or at least have a conversation with them. So it's similar to method acting. The first one is pacing and matching. And Johnny Depp here says that it's just like any part that you play. If you're not yourself, at least part of it, it's lying. So you're matching another person's body language and speech. So this method actor here, he's got several different facial things. So if you look at him, you can kind of tell what kind of emotions he's really feeling. So those things that you can pick up on people, those things that you can actually do yourself can change the mood of the entire room in this particular case, or interacting with any other person. So you're matching that person. So this isn't mirroring. This is integrating elements of their personality with your own. So you're talking to this girl, and she's probably from around here, North Carolina, something like that. And you notice her vocabulary. You notice her, the way she talks. She's probably, even if she's gone to college, she doesn't want to sound pretentious and belittle people, because that's generally speaking that type of vocabulary. And this type of people don't do that. Whereas that thing is made to be very crass, and I would never want to walk up to a person like that on the street. So in pacing and matching, you're kind of bringing yourself in line with the other person. So you can not necessarily, so like it's not mirroring, so you wouldn't want to pick up on somebody's accent, because that could be construed as just being plain rude, or they could recognize that as a technique as mirroring, and then you're busted, then it makes you look like a creep. So you're kind of relaxing yourself, you're bringing your vocabulary in line with theirs so that they feel comfortable around you, and you don't make them feel out of place. Now, mirroring itself is actually broken down into 3 different types of mirroring. Behavioral mirroring is a matched behavior. It's a symbolic with a symbolic meaning. Like a lot of men don't realize when they speak with women that their tone will go up a little bit when they speak to women. That is something that has happened. I mean, think about it. It doesn't work anymore to drag a woman out of a cave by her hair. So the evolution of the species has taught us to make the women feel more comfortable. We adjust without even thinking about it. So that's a behavioral mirror.
You must not read the same fetish mags.
We'll talk about that later on. We'll swap.
No, you're not there.
No, never mind. So there's the second one is symbolic mirroring, wardrobe, and I'll tell you a story on how this worked for me. So I moved to Texas, and I'm dressed like I am now. This is how I've always dressed. I started working with, and I drive an old Volkswagen bus too, just full disclosure on that. So you can imagine me rolling up to, so I work for a local county governments association, and I go show up, and I go to talk to the sheriffs and the commissioners and all that stuff. I'm obviously not like this, but still not in clothes that would be considered Texan. Really had a hard time kind of breaching that gap because Texas is a very special country. It's very unique. Everything there is completely different than anywhere. If you've never been there, it's a wonderful place to go visit. And yeah, so when I went there, I swore to, I was like, there's no way I'm gonna have a hat and I'm gonna have a belt buckle and I'm gonna have boots and Wranglers and all that stuff. But I found that after adapting to how they are and the way that they talk and their mannerisms and things like that, just changing my clothes, I was immediately accepted.
Yeah.
That was it, just the clothes.
Totally.
So it was amazing, and actually I still have all that stuff. I enjoy wearing it every so often, and I never owned a single gun before I went to Texas, and now I own several, and I enjoy shooting them. Although it's harder to shoot here than it is in Texas by far. I mean, you can walk out your back door pretty much and shoot your gun in Texas, so I do miss that. Another form of mirroring, symbolic mirroring, is that of writing. There was around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis and that whole embargo that we put on Cuba, there was a liberal person. He was trying to persuade conservatives to look more into how Cuba really kind of existed in the eyes of a liberal, to convince them of that. So language is very important, the way that someone writes. Just like our language here, as InfoSec people, if we go to the bar later on tonight and start dropping, like 0 days and guess how late I am, and all this stuff, to the bartender's not going to know what to do. She's not going to speak that language. So so this liberal needed to write something to conservatives to persuade them. But he did it in the same language used by conservatives. So it read as something more conservative there. Well, what happened was it angered all the liberals that were used to reading his information. They could not believe he was so conservative in that position. The message was completely liberal, but because he had taken that tone, he'd done that symbolic mirroring of the conservative people, he'd actually been able to get his point across there. Exchange matches aren't necessarily a mirroring thing. It's a substituting another part of the body for another. Just like I'm tapping my foot now, you might see people with hand gestures, the way that they breathe. You can actually exchange body parts to kind of mirror somebody else without actually getting busted for doing it. And I'll give you a perfect example. How many times you've been somewhere where someone's super angry, you put your hands up and you're like, calm down, calm down. What you're doing is you're trying to manipulate their breath and their breathing and trying to bring them down from that state. That's an exchange match. So you're using your hands there to control breathing. Building and maintaining rapport. What am I doing on time? All right, good. So this is where we're talking about, like in jiu-jitsu, this is like closing that gap. You always want to get in close so that you can take advantage of that situation. So this is building a positive connection between you and another group. And speaking to a person doesn't necessarily build rapport. It's not like a gift. You have to actually practice at it to be good. So what do you think would happen if say we're there later on tonight and you got this guy. What do you think would happen if those two girls went up and talked to this guy? I mean, he's probably not going to know how to interact, Huh? Yeah, that's probably true. But what if? I mean, what would this guy, what would happen? Right? But so this is my target, right? This is the guy that has all the keys to the kingdom. I need to get and become friends with him. So those girls aren't going to work. But this guy's definitely not going to work either. He's going to freak him out even more. So what do? You become like this guy so that you can have a positive relation with him. And hopefully when speaking, you have a positive relation with your audience as well. You use the term sensory acuity. You're finding out more about the person's disposition. So you can tell here just by this guy's look on his face. He's obviously had a hard day. He's probably got a headache. He's got circles under his eyes. So you wouldn't want to go up to him and say, "Hey, man, looks like you're having a great day." So you use that sensory acuity. We all have it ingrained into us. This was you recognize certain social patterns. So learning to build on those and understand better patterns, can really help you to build and maintain that rapport. So let's look at some of those things. Some of these things is sensory acuity. Pause or delay and voice. Now, here's a perfect example. If I asked Joshua, did you rob a gas station? Wait. How does it go? Sorry. What were you doing 7 years ago today?
I have no idea.
Right. You paused, you had to I have no clue. But did you rob a gas station 7 years ago today? Okay, great. So I guess I am hanging out with. But just because a person pauses or delays, you have to look at the context of it. You have to look at the context of the question. Is the person pausing or delaying because of the context of the question, or are they doing it because they're being deceptive? A great movie. That was one of the 2 movies I had actually in college that we'd watch over and over again. So dry mouth can show anxiety or alarm and allow me to pause for dramatic effect. I do get dry mouth because this is nerve-wracking sometimes. And we'll go back here to these 2. So not only can your accent tell you where they're from, but their vocabulary levels will tell you their educational level. So speaking with them, generally speaking, if you find somebody that has I won't generalize. So you can understand certain accents when you go in some places that are super, super heavy. They don't use big words. You know that you're not going to go at them with some kind of crazy dictionary and they're not going to understand it because you're never going to be able to build that rapport. That's all about. All we're talking about is building that rapport. So we don't want to alarm people. So when I go I live in Bessemer City, which is outside of Gastonia, and it's a very blue-collar town. When I go into the restaurants there, I don't start dropping all kinds of crazy, huge college-level words on people. Not that I'm that smart to do so, but you bring yourself into that situation and you use words and vocabulary that they could understand. So an accent can really tell you a lot about a person as far as a starting point to understand kind of who they are and what their background is.
It's funny how you automatically do that. You don't even think about it.
Right, you're automatically.
It's just it's now.
Yeah, you just walk right into it. Especially if you're more in tune with yourself and more comfortable with yourself, practicing these things will actually help you become more comfortable with yourself. Even if you don't approach somebody, just noticing these small little nuances and things like that can actually help you understand more about yourself and how you're projecting onto others. So, perfect segue into body language. Stress levels can change in an instant, and this is the sympathetic nervous system or the flight or fight response. You get nervous. You have your pupils dilate, your lips thin, you're rigid, you're tense. Although this guy's, I think his face is stuck in that position anyway.
We'll shoot you with a shotgun in the face.
And he knows what's going on here. Something off camera. Obama didn't know what was going on, and Michelle's very surprised. And maybe I don't know. Who knows what's going on? But those, I mean, that facial expressions there are priceless. You have no clue what's going on off camera, but Michelle's surprised, Obama's disgusted. You can kind of tell that in their face. Yeah, maybe so. So this picture was taken. This picture was taken during South by Southwest during an interview with Lance Armstrong, and this is before it came out that he was actually using drugs. So another thing that you can look for in body language is that of shielding, where you're hiding your mouth, your eyes, or you're deflecting, you're looking around, you're not making eye contact. Now a lot of us don't make eye contact because they're ADD, but that's, you know, so in this particular case he was asked about his drug use, and so he's kind of thinking about it, but that is a sign that there's a possibility of some type of deception happening on that part. And of course there's this guy. So pupil dilation, thinning lips, obviously something's wrong here, so run if you see that. Now calibration is, now we've taken some of these things that we've learned, now calibration is actually taking these things we've learned about the other person, gauge what state they're in, and cultivate that state in ourselves. So if a person's calm, then we can become calm and approach that person so that we can build rapport. Or if we want the opposite effect, say we're going after somebody really hard to, you know, get them in like a manipulation situation where we're trying to get passwords out of them, we can start yelling at them really quickly and elevate their levels right through the roof. But understanding what state they're in allows us to react and change that situation in pretty much an instant. This is a pretty good clip demonstrating posture. You can actually use this. So in this, each frame, he's got a different posture stance and a different facial expression, really kind of telling about what he's doing in this situation. So if a person's very comfortable and with you when they approach, you know, then go talk to them. You know, that's open. But if, generally speaking, like if the feet's closed in a conversation between a person and people are rigid, they're in a conversation, they don't want any actual interaction with anyone else. But generally speaking, if their stance is kind of open, they're more relaxed looking, you can understand that maybe they would accept somebody else coming and introducing themselves, as we've done many times here just in this conference today. Gesturing is important to understand about body language. Now, if you know, yeah, right, New York Italian, right, or something, Italian in general, Jersey Italian. But you're not going to approach somebody like that unless you want to turn them off because you want them to not understand you. Or if you're speaking to another Italian, then that's just the way it happens. Like my wife, she'd have to if you tied her hands behind her back, she couldn't speak because her gesturing is so articulate that she can't get a thought across with it. So if you notice a person, if they're gesturing big, you can come in big. If they're gesturing small with just their hands here, if they're crossed arms, you kind of understand more about what they're feeling at the time and how to approach them. Breathing is the kind of creme de la creme of NLP. Very hard to master. It is proven in hypnosis to put people in a hypnotic trance. The practitioner will actually match his breathing with the other person, and in doing so, you can actually increase their breathing rate or decrease their breathing rate depending on how you want to change it. Now, just a tip for you guys. Breathing obviously happens at the chest, so if you're trying to match a female, it's probably not the best idea to look at breathing there. The shoulders are perfect to use there. So these are some of the things I thought were pretty relevant to this topic, and glad I got a chance to share them with you. So just to wrap up, the mindset of social engineering, it really needs to change. We throw terms out all over the place. We really, the media kind of drives these things. We drive them because they're sexy. We're supposed to be elite hackers and we have all these cool things that we do, but in reality, it's something that is ingrained in us as humans. It's not a technical thing. So if we understand all these different tenets, all these various aspects, we can use them in all aspects of our lives, not only protect ourselves and our families, but also protect our companies and our businesses by testing our employees, by doing these things so that we can understand more about what attacks might be coming against us. So Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions? Josh.
What term would you use?
For the stream.
What term would you use to replace social engineering? I mean, everything you've talked about is part of social engineering as that term is defined today. So you're not talking about changing the ways it works. You just don't like the term. Am I right?
Yes, I just that's a pet peeve of mine.
Okay, so what would you replace it with?
more of this talk was because obviously in my work as a red teamer, I have to do social engineering, and really there's not another term that you're going to use and make up that people are going to adopt overnight. You're going to be just the
manipulation and deception.
Yeah, manipulation and deception, but that doesn't.
It's not sexy enough.
It's not sexy.
You're playing the role of a con artist.
Yeah, you're a con artist. I mean, it's not. Like, it seems like social engineering is accepted as that can be a thing that's, normal. Whereas if you say, I'm a con artist, instead of a social engineer, a con artist or manipulator or deceiver, then...
It's kind of like the old argument that we've lost about hackers and crackers. And,
Right.
Hackers were the white hats and crackers were the black hats. So you're like, well, if I call myself a con artist, they're going to be like, oh, what is he trying to steal of mine? But if I call myself a social engineer, I'm a white hat.
Right. It becomes like we've figured out and we've let the media run wild with it, and now it's stuck. And unfortunately, we're stuck with it too. I try not to use it as much as possible, but when I have to speak to executives, they understand the term social engineering, so I have to use that as well. But I really think that we need to focus more on what?
Cyber manipulator.
Yeah, cyber manipulator.
Cyber manipulator.
Somebody, whoever's drinking, drink for saying cyber.
Cyber engineer.
Synergistic manipulation and deception of human elements in the attack vector platform framework.
Yeah.
2.0. 2.0.
See, all we need is like a sexy acronym, and whoever does
Next gen.
The sexy acronym, and whoever does all the artwork for like all the 0 days. So.
You mad?
No.
Wait.
We're gonna brainstorm this.
Wait, I even got it. Unautomated manipulation and deception by reason. I need an O.
We got a question back here.
Do you ever think that that some of the people that have made stuff famous, like the Kevin Mitnicks and people like that, I think they kind of mess up the game sometimes, and everybody wants to be like them, and everybody wants to be a red teamer. Nobody wants to defend anything. Everybody wants to be a social engineer. Now everybody wants to be a threat intel guy. And it's kind of sad. I hate the way this stuff gets made so sexy, and or whatever. And nobody wants to do anything else but hack stuff and whatever. What do you think about that?
I completely agree. I mean, our industry, like this con, just about every con I've been to is all focused on offensive security, and guys that have done and kind of, been, like, for example, Mitnick was a criminal that did this. And he wasn't a social engineer back then. He was a con man.
So
Yeah.
I don't understand what mindset you want to change. You just don't like the term social engineering because it's too clean to represent that it is just a con or a lie to get your point across? I mean, because what we call social engineering in the security context is one of the biggest things we have to deal with to do the defense. So I think I'm missing something that you're trying to get across.
Well, it's their misrepresentation of what a social engineer is. It's not a defined thing. Like, for example, you have to have a license to practice engineering. You have to be a licensed engineer, and there's actually court cases of people that have said that they are engineers.
Depends on the state.
Depends on the state, correct. But there are things that have happened out there where people said that they're engineers in certain things, and engineering boards and things like that have gone after and prosecuted and things like that. So just because you want to be an engineer, we necessarily call it that.
I think the people that practice social engineering to, get into systems they're not supposed to really aren't going to be concerned with the fact that they don't have an engineering degree.
Right.
They're licensed to do that.
Correct.
It's not an engineer because it takes talent and skills that you've had to learn over time to be able to learn how to manipulate. That's a science in of itself. It's recognizing a problem building.
I don't think social engineering has no skill whatsoever at all. No credit.
I disagree.
I disagree. When you're born, you social engineer your parents. You cry. It's a natural thing that everybody does. It's not some special skill.
Right. That's
Some people are better at it than others.
right.
But everybody do it. We do it every day. When I'm talking to somebody there.
Right. And that's the kind of thing I'm looking at. It's like this is not. I get it's exactly on point. Is that we're calling it something that really is something that's already part of us, and we're wanting it to be something more than that. We're wanting to be like I'm a red teamer. I'm a social engineer. Well,
What's
like
a politician? He's just a manipulator of.
exactly. Politicians the same thing.
So we're politicians.
All right, so
Yeah.
my problem is this, right? We have people that's coming up in the game, want to be in the cybersecurity game. First thing they want to do is read a book by Kevin Mitnick, and they're social engineers as their job title.
Sure, there's definitely over.
Come on, bro. No, bro, you need to. That's ridiculous to me. That's it, like straight up. That's my job. I'm a social engineer. And people, but no, it's people that just do social engineering assessments now. Like it's a whole thing. It's like that's it's crazy to me, bro. I'm sorry.
No, I agree.
You can make money doing social engineering. There's a need for that.
I think it's important to test our folks against attacks that use manipulation, but I don't necessarily agree with it being a full-on assessment. I mean, full-on employment job. Like, yeah. I mean, we've gone off the rails with it.
So if your certification doesn't make it an engineering job.
Right, because an engineer is actually something that is legislatively like
If there's
engineering board.
Is it not an engineering job?
No.
As Microsoft certified system engineer, are you going to hire me at
Right.
$180,000?
I didn't say it was
Because-
a paying job. I didn't
Right.
say it was a good idea. I'm just asking you. You whined about certification.
But it's a board certified from a legislatively thing. It's like it's like, are you a lawyer? Are you a lawyer because you say you're a lawyer? Can you call yourself a lawyer? Or I guess not a lawyer, but an attorney. You have to be licensed to do.
Okay, tell me that ASSIST is a good certification.
No, it's not a good
But it's
certification.
the one that the government accepts for high security, high quality.
Right, because it's gone through all of the different standard processes that the government requires.
Board certified information security professional.
Right.
I'm just busting that.
I know, that's fine. We'll continue this later on at the bar. Right. So, reference slide, I've got it up. If anyone's interested, some of those books are great. All those books are great. I had a really good time doing this course. So I'm thinking, so my overarching thing about it's like it's not necessarily an art form that's unique to us. It's a complete and total science of sociology, and there's degrees and there's doctors and people that study human behaviors and things like that. So
My guess is none of those books referenced social engineering.
correct.
As somebody with 3 master's degrees in computer science, including offensive security, a specific master's program created, does that not qualify me as an engineer?
Are you licensed as an engineer? Like if
I mean, I'll stick on this. I'm a computer scientist as well, both undergrad and master's degree, and it is not an engineer. Even in the startup circles, I still bristle when they want to call everyone software engineers. I'm like, we are doing.
I create something, I produce something, it's an end product, that's engineering. Whether it's hardware or software, it's the same component, right?
yeah, but calling yourself an engineer and not being licensed as an engineer can get you in trouble. Just as a lawyer practicing as an attorney.
That's a very small subset of states.
Take the mic.
Yes. I mean, this is all just a matter of, it's just like the guilds. It's all about guilds. Professional engineers,
All right.
lawyers.
Yeah, so
It's all about
everybody, like, so let's wrap this up for right now.